So today we're going to be talking about directed segment, and this directly relates to midpoint. So the first question we're going to start with is I'm going to ask you to find the midpoint of segment AB, given A is 7, 7, -1, and B is -3, 3. And to do this, I'm going to just use slope. So I'm going to find that my change in y over change in x, so I went down 4 and over 10. So if I go down 4 and over 10, and the midpoint I want to get to half, I have to divide by 2. So I'm then going to do go down 2 and over 10, because half of 4 is obviously 2 and half of 10 is 5. So if I go down 2 and over 5, I get to point M over here. I'm going to call that M for midpoint to be 2, 1. And think about what that does now. Point M divides AB into 2 equal parts, BM and AM. So now let's kind of throw in this question to you. What's the ratio that M divides segment AB into? Well, there's 2 equal parts, right? So if M divides it into 2 equal parts or 2 equal pieces, it makes it a 1-to-1 ratio. Now, if it's a 1-to-1 ratio and there are 2 parts, think about what these pieces mean in terms of the whole thing. There's 1 part and 1 part, which gives you 2 total parts. So anytime you're dealing with a ratio, you can figure out the total number of parts by adding these 2 pieces together, these 2 parts. Okay? All right, so let's kind of take this idea and somehow mold it to figure out how does this relate to dividing a segment to any sort of ratio, not just 1-to-1. So here's what we're dealing with. We have endpoints of AB, A at -1, -1, B at 3, 7. We have to find the coordinates of the point that divides AB into a 3-to-1 ratio. All right, so first thing that's obviously important is that we have our endpoints AB, and the ratio is 3-to-1. All right, so AB, we're going to set this the same way we would do if it was midpoint. We're going to find the change in y over change in x. Right, essentially the slope. So let's do that. So change in y over change in x. This is kind of old school. We should be able to do this. We're going to subtract our y values and then find the difference of our x values. Just be careful, if it's a double negative, it really means to add. So 7 minus a -1 is 8. 3 minus a -1 is 4. Now I'm giving you this like big kind of hello, don't do this. We're not going to simplify. You never want to simplify the slope when dividing a segment or even finding midpoint for that matter. Okay, so remember, the 8 kind of goes with the change in y, and the 4 goes with the change in x. Okay, so the next part is if it was midpoint, we would be finding half the distance. You'd be dividing by 2. Now think about how you get half from a ratio. The ratio is 1-to-1. How do I get half? Now remember, it's 2 total parts, and the first number, 1 over 2, is 1/2. So we're going to take 3-to-1 and turn it into a ratio take this ratio and turn it into a fraction. The way we're going to do that is by taking the first part of the ratio and putting it over the total number of parts. So 3/4. This is going to be the fraction we're going to use. Now you find the total number of parts by adding the 2 pieces together. So 3 plus 1 is 4. It's going to be this way every single time. Okay, you're always going to take the first part of the ratio and put it over the total number of parts. So now the next step is going to be combining somehow this change in y, this change in x, and using 3/4. Because this essentially means we want to go 3/4 of the way. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our change in x and multiply it by 3/4, and then take our change in y and multiply it by 3/4. This will tell us how far to move x-wise and how far to move y-wise. Okay, so x is 3 and y is 8, right? From our change in y and change in x. And we're going to multiply it by that new fraction of 3/4. So this tells us we're going to go 3/4 of our change in x. We're going to go 3/4 of the change in y. So 3/4 of 4 is just 3, and 3/4 of 8 is 6. It matters the sign, so it's a +3 and a +6. So that means we're going to add 3 to our x, and we're going to add 6 to our y. Well, x and y, we need a coordinate. We're going to always start at the first piece or the first part of our segment. So here we have to start at A. A is -1, -1. So we're going to write down our starting point A, and we're going to add 3 to the x, and we're going to add 6 to the y. So -1 plus 3 is 2, -1 plus 6 is 5. So 2, 5 is the point that divides AB into a 3-to-1 ratio. Now, something else I just want to quickly show you is it's 3-to-1. That means that this piece is 3 times as big as this piece. If you find from A to this point, it goes up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and over 3. So we have 6 over 3. So this should be 3 times as big as this little piece over here, which is up 2 and over 1. Up 2 over 1, which it is, right? So this is 3 times as big as this. So if I do 2 times 3, I get 6. 1 times 3 is 3. Perfect. Okay. So we're going to follow these same 4 steps in another question. Let's see how we do. Kind of summarize as we go. Okay, so another question, we're dealing with PQ, and the endpoints are 2, 8 and 7, 3, P and Q. And we want the ratio of 4 to 1. All right, so ratio of 4 to 1. We know we're going to have to start at P eventually. And so first part, think back to what we just did, is finding slope, changing y over changing x. So here it is, slope, changing y over changing x. Something I just want to add is that when you find the slope, if there's a negative, it should always be on top. So even if you did it over here, and you get -5 in the denominator, you're going to always put it back up to the numerator. It needs to be that way in terms of when we're dealing with slope, because you can't have that negative on the bottom. Okay, so next part is finding now with the ratio that fraction. So if our ratio is 4 to 1, we know we need 4/5. Why? Well, it's the first part, which is 4, over the total number of parts, which is 4 plus 1. So 4/5. Okay, next step, we're going to combine this first step and the second step. So for your x, we found the change in x is 5. We want to take 4/5 of 5. For your y, your change in y was -5. We want to take 4/5 of -5. Now the signs are important. 5 times 4/5 is a +4. -5 times 4/5 is a -4. All right, so now the starting point was P, 2, 8. Add 4 to x, subtract 4 from y. That means that we have 6, 4, so +6, +4 as our new point. And I plotted it here just to make sure it made sense that we were going in a 4 to 1 ratio. And it's definitely 4 times as big as this little piece over here. Okay. So again, same 4 steps. So to divide a segment, either you can summarize the steps that we've done, or you can kind of just jot down what we have. And that's first to find change in x, change in y over change in x, or slope. You don't want to simplify, the negative should always be on top. Second is dealing with the ratio and turning into a fraction. It's the first part of the ratio over the total number of parts. Remember, to find the total, you add together the 2 pieces. Next, you're going to combine steps 1 and 2. Your change in x times that new fraction, your change in y times that new fraction that you got from that ratio. And then finally, step 4 is you're going to figure out, all right, well, where did I start? What was my starting point? I'm going to take that x value and add whatever I got here. That starting point, my y value, and add whatever I got here. And then that will give you your final point, right? You're going to pick the x and y value listed first in the segment. That's how you figure out what the x and y value should be there. Okay, so there it is. So if you need to pause and jot this down, or you can kind of just rewind and go back every time you want to look at the steps. Okay. So we're going to do this one together, and then I'm going to have you kind of try a couple by yourself, and then just check it with watching my video. Okay, so now we have the endpoint of DEF are D14 and F16, 14. We have to determine and state the coordinates of point E if DE to EF is in the ratio of 2 to 3. Okay, so 2 to 3 is important. And we know we're going to start at D because that was listed first. So remember, change in y over change in x comes first. So change in y, we have 14 minus 4, change in x, 16 minus 1. So we have change in y is going to be 10, change in x is going to be 15. Now I have to figure out, using our ratio of 2 to 3, we end up with 2/5. First part of the ratio over the total number of parts, right? 2 over 2 plus 3, which is 5. Next, deal with the x, then the y. Your change in x was 15. We're going to multiply it by that fraction of 2/5. We're going 2/5 of the way in the 2 to 3 ratio. Y, the change in y is 10. Same thing, multiplied by 2/5. So 15 times 2 is 30, divided by 5 is 6. 10 times 2 is 20, divided by 5 is 4. Now we're going to start at point D, which is 1, 4. We're going to add 6 to x, add 4 to y. That means 1 plus 6 is 7, 4 plus 4 is 8. So point E should be 7, 8. Now notice I don't even have a piece of graph paper over here to check my work, but if I want, I could certainly sketch one and kind of check it out. Okay. So we're doing this algebraically, which it will work if you do this systematically. Use your calculator, make sure you don't have any errors, and we should be good to go. Okay? All right. Let's go on. So now for the next two, like I said, you might want to just like kind of pause the screen and try these out, and then listen to me kind of go through the solutions. And then number 6, that's the one you're going to submit through Google Forms. Okay, so for number 4, we have points A, -6, -5. B is 4, 0. Point P, we need to have on AB, it's going to divide it into a 2 to 3 ratio. I'm kind of skimming through the questions for all the important parts. First step, changing y over changing x. Here it is. So we have 5 over 10. All right, next step. Let's use this ratio of 2 to 3. So 2 to 3 means first part over the total number of parts. So we have 2/5. Next, we're going to take this fraction and take 2/5 of 10 and 2/5 of 5. So there it is. 2/5 of 10, 2/5 of 5. That means that we have a positive 4 and a positive 2. Now figure out our starting point. Our starting point is going to be A, which is -6, -5. So I'm going to list -6, -5, add 4 to x, add 2 to y, and we're left with -2, -3. And there it is. This one almost looks a little bit less obvious, because if it's a 2 to 3 ratio, right, it's just a little less obvious, but we still have that 2 to 3 ratio. All right, and then finally number 5. So we have PT, we have to find point J, so divide it into a 2 to 1 ratio. So again, changing y over changing x should be the first part. There it is, changing y, changing x, 6 over 6. Next, let's deal with the ratio. If it's 2 to 1, it really just means 2 to 1. So there it is. That means it's 2/3 is our fraction. We're going 2/3 of the way, right? So 2/3 of our x and then 2/3 of our y. Here we have it. So it's a +4 +4 to point P. And point P is -2, 1. So you put -2, 1, add 4 to x, add 4 to y, gives us 2, 5. So our new point J will divide this into a 2 to 1 ratio. Okay, and there it is. Again, feel free to rewind, re-listen to any portion of this lesson, but we follow the same 4 steps for each and every question. So then for number 6, you're going to do the same thing. Now remember, this is not going to be submitted until Thursday, because there's going to be questions from tomorrow's lesson on those Google Forms as well. And you're finding the coordinates of P that divides AB into a 3 to 5 ratio. Okay, so just make sure you do the same steps. You find changing y over changing x. You don't simplify, the negative goes on top if there is one. Take your ratio, turn it into a fraction. First part over the total number of parts. Third step, combine steps 1 and 2. Take your change in x times that new fraction, change in y times that new fraction. Finally, take your starting point, which here would be A. Take that new number for x and add it, and then the new change for y and add it, and that will give you a new point for P, your new coordinates. Okay? If you have any questions, please email me.